Hey scientists, it's Jessica Power from Kansas City Public Schools, one of the science curriculum coordinators. I hope you had an awesome Halloween, but we're back with more science. So scientists, we're going to start with an activity or an experiment. So I have with me a softball. And scientists, I'm going to let go of this softball. Hands off. Scientists, when I let go of this softball, what do you think is going to happen? Take a second to make a prediction. When I let go of this softball, what do you think is going to happen? Make a prediction. Got your prediction? Okay. Let's try it. Ready? Softball. Letting go. What happened? Yeah, it fell to the ground. Let's try it again. Okay, scientists, this time I'm going to toss it up in the air. What do you think is going to happen? When I toss this ball up in the air, what do you think is going to happen? And no, I'm not catching it. I'm going to toss it up in the air and stand back. What do you think is going to happen to this softball when I toss it? Make a prediction. Got your prediction? Let's see. Was your prediction correct? Did the ball fall to the ground like you said it was going to? Scientists, do you know why the ball fell to the ground? When I dropped it, it fell to the ground. And even when I threw it up in the air, when I had it going in a different direction, it still fell to the ground. Do you know why? Well, today, scientists, we're going to talk about why. And that why is gravity. Gravity is a force between two objects. So, if I get the softball again, in our experiment here, it was the force between the softball and the earth. Yeah, like the whole earth, not just where I'm standing. It's a force that pulls objects to the center of the earth. Now, standing below me is the ground, right? But if we got rid of the ground, this ball would keep dropping to the center of the earth. Now, when I say center, I realize that can be a little misconstruing, meaning it can be confusing. On this picture, you'll see that there are 4 stick people. And those 4 stick people have each dropped a red ball. And you'll see that red ball is falling towards the earth. Now, scientists, when it hits the ground, it's going to stop. But when I say that things are pulled towards the center of the earth, they're not pulled to the middle of the ocean. That's not the center of the earth we're talking about. We're talking about the core, the very, very middle. So if I cut open this softball, there'd be different layers in it. And if I cut it open, the very, very center would be a core. It's a cork. And the earth is very similar. So here's a poster of the earth. The earth is a sphere, as we know, so it's round. So here's the earth. And in this picture, the earth has been cut away from the different layers. So we live on this layer called the crust. And that's the dirt, that's the mountains, the things that we see that we think of as the ground. Now below the crust, we have this area called the mantle. Okay? And inside of the mantle, you'll see that there's an inner mantle and an outer mantle. And it's made up of different materials. Now as we work our way to the center, we call this the core of the earth. Now the core of the earth is really, really hot, and it's made of different metals at liquid temperature. But we're not worried about that today. We're focused on gravity. What I want to get to at this point, scientists, is that when I say that things are pulled to the center of the earth, I mean they're pulled to the core. They're pulled to the very, very middle of the sphere. That's why when you drop something here in Kansas City, it falls down to the ground. If we were to take a plane flight and go to Brazil in South America, and I drop something, it's going to fall down to the ground. Even though we're up here in Kansas City and Brazil is down here. If we travel to West Africa, we may be over here, but if I drop something, it's still gonna fall down to the ground. The whole idea is that gravity is the force that pulls objects to the center of the earth. It's why you and it's why me stay on the ground as we walk. Now, in 1969, we had a team of astronauts that went to the moon, and they landed on the moon. And there's a very famous quote that says, "There's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." Meaning that we had gotten to a new place. We had gone to the moon. We had gone somewhere that other people hadn't been yet. And that was a really big deal. But what's interesting about landing on the moon is that on the moon, you feel a whole lot different than you do here on Earth. If you ever get a chance to watch the video from the real astronauts in 1969 that landed on the moon, you actually see them kind of like floating. So they kind of are like walking, hopping like this. And it's not because this is how they walk. It's because that's the only way they could. Scientists, the gravitational pull or the force of gravity on the moon is not near as strong as it is here on Earth. So when you see those astronauts kind of floating, that's because the gravity is a lot less. The moon's gravity is not pulling the astronauts to stay on the ground like we are here on Earth. Now, something else is really interesting. And you can actually search this video on YouTube, or you can search it just using Google. But you can actually Google or search for an experiment that was done on the moon. Now, in 1969, the astronauts took a feather and a hammer up to the moon. Now, this is important because if I drop a hammer and a feather here on Earth, which one's gonna hit the ground first? Yeah, probably the hammer, because it's heavier. But actually, if I took out all the air, got rid of all this air, you can feel the air, right? If you fan yourself off. The air is actually what's causing the feather to float. If we got rid of the air, the feather and the hammer would fall at the exact same time. Exact same time. How crazy is that? Because the force of gravity is the same no matter what object is falling. No matter a feather or a piece of paper or a rock or a bowling ball. The force of gravity is the same anytime it pulls something to the center of the earth. Let's go back to the astronauts. 1969, astronauts are on the moon, and they decide to take with them a hammer and a feather because they want to prove that gravity is a constant, meaning that no matter what is dropped, the gravitational pull will be the same on every object. Now, the reason they were able to prove this to be correct is because on the moon, there's not really an atmosphere. So like, we're breathing in oxygen right now, there's all this air. Yeah, that doesn't happen on the moon. There's no air resistance. There's no air impacting how the feather is floating to the ground. So they have the feather, they have the hammer, and the astronaut lets go of both of them. And you're able to see on the moon, both the feather and the hammer drop at the exact same time. Because gravity on the moon, even though there's not as much as there is here on Earth, the gravity was pulling the feather and the hammer towards the center of the moon at the exact same rate. But we don't live on the moon, so let's come back to Earth. So scientists, let's talk about the history of gravity. So a really long time ago, there was this guy named Sir Isaac Newton. And he was a scientist. And Newton's actually really famous for his laws of motion, which we'll talk about later. But one thing that Newton figured out was this thing called universal gravity. And he figured out that objects fall to the center of the earth. So we can thank Newton and the scientists that came before him for these laws that we understand today. So I have a book with me, and it's called Science Ideas in 30 Seconds. And I just wanted to give you, there's a section about gravity, and I just wanted to give you a really quick snippet or piece of information about Isaac Newton. So here we go. Gravity in 30 seconds. The ancient Greeks were certain that the earth and the rest of the universe were made of different things and obeyed different laws. Right, so everything's different. But in the 16th century, that's the 1500s, a long time ago, scientists such as Galileo questioned this idea. And the view emerged that the same laws work all over the universe, which is why gravity here on Earth, the pull to the center of the Earth, is the same concept as the idea of gravity pulling the hammer and the feather towards the center of the moon. Now, Isaac Newton decided that the same law made apples fall to the ground, kept the moon close to the earth, the law of gravity. Gravity attracts objects in space towards each other and pulls objects on the earth towards the center of the planet, so that things fall to the ground when they are dropped. Newton even worked out a mathematical version of his discovery and used it to predict the motion of the moon, comets, and planets. Today it is used to steer spacecrafts through our solar system and beyond. So scientists, because of a discovery in the 16th century or 1500s, we're still using that understanding today as we navigate space. So when we think about the new discoveries that they're finding on Mars, we can thank Isaac Newton for his understanding and development of the theory of gravity, the law of gravity, to allow our spacecrafts or our different robots to get there and land on Mars. So scientists, to recap, gravity is a force between two objects. So when I had my softball and I dropped it, it was the force or the attraction between the softball and the earth. Now, gravity can be as simple as keeping you and I on the ground, or it can be as complex as keeping the earth in its revolution, keeping Mars in its revolution, keeping Jupiter in its revolution, and holding everything in place where it needs to be. Gravity is at the center of everything. So scientists, keep a lookout. When you ever hear someone yell, "Heads up," that means that something's coming down because of the force of gravity. I'll see you next week. Have a great day.